Hello and welcome to HolisticCircle podcast Spiritual Conversation. My name is Philipp Kobald. We are reaching out to people who are passionate about spreading light, love, and joy and knowledge. And I'm happy to have you with me, Lee Newitt. Hello, Lee.
Philip, good to see you. We got the giggles. We've had a few technical issues, but we're good.
This is my third introduction, and I'm leaving out. I'm editing and leaving out. So I was hoping you would speak with me from your wonderful cabin in France, but it turns out you're on holiday in your home country.
This is correct. We spend half the time in France at the moment, half the time in the UK. So we're in a little caravan down on the south coast and waiting for our next excursion into France.
All right. So I'm not sure if I like what I hear, because if you're a true Dante scholar, you would be exiled. And if you would have come back home, you would have been stoned to death or something like that. So they're not happy with the outcome.
Semi-exiled.
All right. The people have no idea why we're laughing, what's going on, and they think it's an ayahuasca retreat recorded. No, it's not. This is a wonderful, serious conversation coming our way about hell, of all things. But before we get into that, would you be so kind and one more time make a small introduction about, as you said, very usual life, did you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I would describe it, perhaps an unusual term, but a wondrously average life, in that it's a life that has all the usual things in it. There's been some real highs, there's been some real lows, there's been some gains, there's been some losses, there's been moments of success, and there's been moments of abject failure. So like all of us, my life has been one of striving and struggling. It's been one in which there's been a changing relationship with myself. I think it's fair to say, as a young man, I really didn't know who I was, didn't know what life was about. And most of my adult life has been a journey of exploring these questions about who I am at the very deepest levels that I could possibly get to. And that's taken me through, perhaps, I might say that most of my adult life I've been a good materialist, a good atheist. My first career was in chemistry, a material scientist, really subscribed to the idea that we're a bag of bones, of chemicals. We live, we die, that's it. Let's make the best of it and do the best we can in the time we've got. But really, it's all about these causes and effects, these connections, and that's really it. I think I did have a passion about, and do have a passion about, asking questions about the world in which we live in. And I think that's why I ended up getting drawn to science, because it was my way of being able to explore some of these questions and try and find your way into some of the answers about what is going on. How does it all work? How does it all come together? Why is this like the way it is? And that brought me very quickly into wanting to share that interest and that passion in education. I've been a teacher, a school leader, taught in mainstream schools in the UK, and then moved into special needs teaching. And again, I think this is, for me, was one of these pivotal moments in life, one of these turning points, where I think I started to recognize, both as a school leader, but also from the nature of the challenges that the students had, what it meant to be human, what it really meant to be human. Because I was working with students that were paraplegic, were nonverbal, and these students still had an amazing personality, amazing sense of spirit, and this quality of what makes us human. It still comes through. And I think I've said many a times to parents that these children, your children, have taught me more than I could ever possibly teach others and teach them. And I think it's led me slowly into starting to explore psychology, particularly the psychology of what makes us best we can be as humans, positive psychology, but also developmental psychology, existential psychology, and transpersonal psychology. I suppose the journey has been one of these full of surprises in many ways. I didn't have answers, I had questions. And as I went through, part of this the questions got bigger and it led me into a place where we're starting to recognize things that perhaps are the age-old questions about the nature of reality, the nature of life, the nature of consciousness. It's the stuff, Philip, that's fundamental to many religions, to many ancient wisdom traditions, etc. The questions just kept getting bigger. It's interesting when you ask this and you start looking back on life. There's moments that I recognize that I didn't really know what I was doing. In one sense, I was plundering around in the dark. Yes, I'd got wonderful people. I got the existential psychologists, Viktor Frankl, Irvin Yalom, Rollo May, Eric Fromm. We got the psychologists from humanistic psychology, Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow. I'm hoping these are names that people might have heard at least one or two of them. And of course, Carl Jung, who was supporting me on this journey, were giving me insights. But I didn't realize I was on a spiritual journey. Again, I thought I was on a journey about my career. I thought I was on a journey about asking these questions and starting to find your way into answers. But I had a number of different moments, a number of different life events, a number of different experiences that really started to open the doors on our perceptions of reality, to coin a phrase. And in 2019, I had a profound awakening experience. I think that's probably the easiest way to describe it, that really has changed the direction in which my life has been going and the way in which I've been making sense of it. There's been some profound effects that have come out of this, things that I wouldn't predicted, things that I didn't know that I was working towards, but ultimately it's led me into teaching psychology at university. It's led me into creating a master's course in spirituality, ecology, and mental health. And now it's led me into a space where we're trying to bring this to ever wider audiences and share this in different ways. And I suppose through all of that, like everybody, it's still about living this stuff. It's still about trying to create a life that is the life that you get a sense of wanting to live through you. Not one that you're trying to shape yourself, but one that seems to have been there all along, that's been knocking at the edges or trying to push its way into your life. But if you're like me, you've ignored it, you've pushed it aside, or you haven't picked it up. So that in a nutshell is where I've come from and what's motivating me.
May I bounce back that things happen to good people and spirituality happen to good people too.
Absolutely. And perhaps this is what brought me to some of the work of Dante, because it's not a pleasant journey in many of it. This is a journey that's formed in fire, forged in fire. It's the biggest learning can be in these most difficult and challenging and moments of struggle and crisis.
When else do people learn?
Yeah, there's an old Buddhist phrase, isn't there? I think about this. First of all, poke you with the twig. If you don't wake up, then we'll do you with the whole branch. And if you still don't wake up, the whole tree's required.
It's a very fantastic way that while I was listening to you, I said, good grief, if that conversation goes on any longer, this will be the last podcast I ever record, because you basically you just sum up everything I'm planning to do the next 10 years with my podcast. That's basically it, that's the index card. What is it all about?
Well, it won't be the first time I put my foot on it.
And it's so wonderful because I already had 2 podcasts where I had like investment bankers from all people turning out to be trauma therapy. And I go for chemistry, which I think chemistry is much closer to spirituality than investment banking. But because what makes spirituality, and for me, listening to you, it sounds much less of a change or much less of a transition that you make it sound like, because to me, science is one of the many elements how spirituality is expressed. It's a very natural thing. And there has always been a lot of intertwining between scientists and spiritual seekers. And I mean, looking at England, looking at Isaac Newton and whatnot, just starting with the big name, spirituality and science, or curious people, or people who ask questions, and people who are unfortunately not afraid of the answers.
Absolutely. I haven't, in fact, the work that has taken me forward has been almost going backwards and going, what is the science saying? Here you are, Lee. You're going through life. You're trying to make sense of life. You're trying to make sense of who you are. You turn to psychology. You turn to those researchers that are trying to take the immeasurable and in some way make it measurable. Now, I think, first of all, we've got to separate science from scientism, this idea that science deals in facts and that science has the answers and you can sort of just forget everything else and blindly follow it. You know, when the science I'm talking about is a debate. It's about a weight of evidence. It's about trying to find some evidence that supports different ideas and theories, or disproves different theories. But it's about the evidence. It's about trying to find some things that are tangible. And when these experiences, when this awakening, I call it my Bath experience because that's where it took place. When this happened to me, it was really destabilizing. It was very powerful. It was very energetic. It was really, you can use things like death and rebirth, dissolution. There was a real sense of the foundations being shaken and that the tower was beginning to tumble. Bits were falling off. There really was this breaking down. And I was lucky that I had good people around me to support me. My Professor Piers Worth, to the university I was teaching at, Buckinghamshire, New University. There's the little plug. That's where I'd done my studies in applied positive psychology. And as well as having good people around me, the quest became one of meaning. It was trying to make sense of what was happening, what had happened. And I turned, like perhaps many of us, to other people that had different experiences. I heard a lot of different individual views, and I don't knock any of those individual views in the slightest, but it took me from Palladians to shamans to all sorts of different modalities of spirituality. And I'll be honest, at that time, it started to feel confusing, it started to feel overwhelming. And it started to feel like I was going on the character of the person. And I didn't know these people. It was about trusting their interpretations, trusting their truths about things. And, I'm not going to knock anybody's truth about this. But actually, I wanted something that was giving me some sort of more objective perspective. I wanted something, as I had gone through life, I wanted something that was giving me some research, some evidence that was, okay, it's always subjective in one sense because we're dealing with human beings, but at the same time that was beginning to deal with that subjectivity in an objective way, trying to create experiments, trying to create tests and measures that would give us clues about the nature of what was going on, clues about what that means in terms of the world in which we're living, clues in what that means in terms of who we are as human beings, as spiritual beings. So for me, I turned, and there is a personal choice. I want to be really clear about that. It is a personal choice, but I turned back towards science, and I was absolutely surprised that there is a wealth of research and study and evidence that is pointing us in interesting directions towards that veil of mystery. I won't say it gives us answers, but there already is certainly a direction that we're being nudged towards. And I think what surprised me more than anything is that...
Would you be so kind? Can you maybe give one concrete example so people a little bit get more of a plastic feeling? Would you have something come to your mind? Anything?
Yeah, I would. One of the areas that I really didn't expect to find myself was going into physics. Now, it's going to be no surprise that I'm going to share ideas from quantum physics. We live in a world today that really still, on an everyday basis, is functioning in Newtonian. You mentioned Newton earlier, but it's still functioning in Newtonian physics. Everything is cause and effect, and these laws that we should be able to work out that will explain absolutely everything. And yet, from the 1900s, when the first ideas about an alternative view of reality, this idea of quantum physics started to creep in, and as that's progressed, and now we're at a point where we're talking about quantum computing, i.e. we've moved from a theoretical perspective to actual technological perspective, that the theory is leading to technological advances. And I think that's an important paradigm shift. It's an important increasing in the understanding that is required and starts to come as a result of that technological push.
It's very interesting because I've been asking myself this question for now quite many years, being an Austrian first and foremost, when, so to say, quantum philosophy will start to, and people start to try, and I know that some people wrote about it and try to explain. And I was wondering because human has to evolve, it's always technical, philosophically, society, it should always go hand in hand. That would be the ideal version of things. And not always like that, but at the end of a cycle, it is like that. Sometimes one grows much faster than the other, but ultimately you can't split this in. So I was wondering when quantum philosophy and quantum thinking will enter the societies.
Absolutely. And let me throw another phrase in: quantum psychology. What for me, I'm not going to try and get into explaining quantum physics in the time that we've got, it's way too big. But as an example, you've got...
And you already did, and did again. So there you go.
Perhaps I'll do it a third time then without even realizing. You've just had Google, their work on their quantum computer, do a calculation that theoretically should take longer to calculate than the universe has been in existence. And they went out a couple of months ago and put out this as evidence for information coming from somewhere other than our own universe. And they said it was evidence for a multiverse philosophy or theory. Now, you said a computing company that's stepping into that space. If you can't see the parallels to spirituality in just that one piece of evidence, it's information coming from somewhere other than our own material universe. Isn't that wouldn't we describe that in spiritual terms as a phrase like gnosis or intuition? Ideas of the Akashic record from Hinduism that suggest there is a deeper level of reality that contains all the information that has ever been come into existence, so to speak.
Or basically, there's so much money coming out of their ears that they need another universe to invest.
Yes. And spirituality is political as well, because it is about how we live our lives. If we can't touch spirituality down on the ground, if we can't walk it, if we can't breathe it, then actually it's nothing more than navel gazing. Absolutely. Yes, let's get some politics in there.
And that's the wonderful thing, that we're all coming full circle, don't we? We understand that there is, and I've been very much criticized. It is the first time I've been really heavily criticized on my podcast. And I always think I'm such a nice guy. But somebody got really berserk the other day out there because I have this strong belief and I stick to it no matter what. I apologize to that person all over again because I stick to my guns. I believe any worthwhile spiritual journey, yes, has moments of silence and sitting and reading a book and contemplation, but it's just worth nothing if you then don't go out there in the world and test these theories, try to live or breathe these theories, and then get confronted with other people who tell you that's bollocks, or, oh wow, that's great, I love to hear it. But most likely they will tell you, just shut up, it's just nonsense. So this is the spiritual journey that we work ourselves, we try very hard, then we go out there and get punched in the face. And this is it. Otherwise, I stick to my guns. It's a meaningless exercise.
Absolutely. Let's throw in Rollo May, existential psychologist and philosopher. He would say that action leads to insight, not vice versa. It is about going into the world and trying to live these thoughts. We're not trying to kick, in one sense, I'm not trying to kick our own personal experience into touch, because that's valuable and important information. And at the same time, we can look at other people that are trying to observe and measure reality and get useful information that way. But actually, the emphasis comes back on us as an individual to bring those two worlds of the experiential and the conceptual together and live it. And in living it, that is where we get the opportunity to test it, to gain the insights.
Manifest.
Absolutely. And we don't do that alone. We do that in a world that is rich with consciousness and diversity, both human and non-human. And
yeah, because for me, always ultimately, what's it worth it if I'm not ending up being a better husband, a better father, better whatnot? What's it all worth it if I can't measure my knowledge from God by just being a better guy or cleaning the rivers or anything measurable? And I think it must be measured in the communion. I think it's a human trait. Otherwise, it's a God trait, right? If I cut myself from communion and I live alone in the desert and I just fly and just clink into the higher angels and all of it, all very wonderful and lovely, but are you still a full human? This is one of my main questions in life, because I'm teaching more than 30 years meditation. And when you are into those, I've spent almost a year and a half basically shutting myself in the apartment and just meditating day and night a couple of years back. And it was a wonderful gift. But you really, in some moment, really feel a strong disconnect. It's amazing. I can sit for hours and it's the best feeling ever. But am I still human? And what am I if not? So this is something that started my deeper questioning, if I had to share something with you.
yeah, and I think beautifully insightful there, Philip. We're really getting to the nub of it all. And actually, as I'm listening to you, there's part of me that's been drawn to think about what sits at the heart of what you're describing. And I think it's something that's transformative. To be human is to transform. We go through the passage of time, we age, but also not do we just physically transform, we are spiritually and psychologically transforming. And if we can stand back and look beyond just being human, just being the individuals that we are, and look at the universe around us, we see it's evolving, it's transforming. There's a constant process that is taking place that we're part of. We're an intrinsic part of it. We are it. We're not separate from it. This is happening and taking place through us. So what does that mean for our lives? Actually, it is about growth. It is about seeking, you can say about seeking answers to these questions, but actually I'm much more of that poetic sort of lilt that says actually it's the answers are less important than the questions themselves, because the question is what carries us forward. It's what we live into the question, as Rainey Marie Rilke puts it. We live into these questions one day, So it's about setting off on a journey that is going to change and shape ourselves. And in the course of doing that, somehow we may be fulfilling some evolutionary influence or process that's living through us, that through bringing that out in ourselves, we're contributing to shaping a better world, a better planet, a better universe, so to speak. And I know that's difficult when we're surrounded at the moment in chaos and pain, and to try and say the word better is almost it's at odds with what we're seeing minute by minute in the world at this moment in time. Ultimately, any transformation is one that is born out of struggle. It is a process of surrender and of letting go for something new to be born. And that's a messy, disruptive, painful, and difficult process. Anyway, I've never had the pleasure of giving birth, so to speak, but my wife and many other women in my life have told me what a difficult and a process that is. And so it is psychologically, so it is potentially spiritually. I don't think we should expect some sort of easy path, but what we should expect is a path that is more meaningful and one that is about bringing out the very deepest expression of who we are through through that creative gift of giving. If we can touch the deepest seed within ourselves and get that seed to sprout, that is what we give forth. And because it's coming from our uniqueness, it is a unique gift. Whether it's not about success, it's not about being the first to do something, it's not about earning the most money from it or anything like that, or even earning money from it. But it is about an expression of who we are and our place, and knowing that we're part of something that is fundamentally bigger than us, and it lives and flows through us. It is us.
If you drop in such a great name and quoting them, well, then let me quote my favorite Hallmark Christmas movie. It's all about love.
And that's what Dante would say. Ultimately, if you go, if you want to cheat, you want to go to the end of the movie. You've just done it, Philip. Go to the end of the book. He says, "What's making the heavens all move and everything tick and the rest of it? It's love." And it might sound like the world's greatest cliche, but actually, I think it's the world's greatest truth.
Well, if you come with Carl Jung was not, I come with Hallmark movie. Everybody on his level.
Look, I don't think it's about levels. Let's bring it from everywhere, because all of this is gifts. This is one of the dangers of being involved in academia and courses and teaching and stuff, is this illusion you can fall into that you've got the answers, that you've got it sorted, that somehow and actually we're not. And we need to bring it down to every level, I don't mean that every level, but actually
words,
all the different ways of connecting with people. And it's not just academic. It is through movie, it's through literature, it's through art, it's through immersion in nature, it's through creativity. It's everything that we can do. We can express that spirituality. We can express that learning, and we can get that feedback.
Right. Well, true words spoken very calmly about this. And if you think that scientists and academia is quite up there, you never talk to a civil engineer. Oh, dear Lord. But when we start with mechanics, then I think it's time to finally reach our destination. And basically, let's take off the shirts and whatnot. It's when I get hot. And please take us by the hand, because we always need somebody taking us by the hand and bring us down to hell and hopefully back up again, and tell us why, from all that you've said so far and you've laid the ground, you've found your path, your personal path, or the way path makes sense to you, or how you can stay on path or engage, or whatever is the terminology. You just found Dante, and is one of the greatest pieces of art ever produced by humanity, one of the great encyclopedias of knowledge that we have. And this is now where your spiritual journey is at the moment where you draw your energy from. So please, let's give it a go.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, let me take a pause and just frame this for a second. So we can turn to the Jungian psychologists Murray Stein and Bill Plotkin. And both of these have used the pattern of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly to explain transformation. And I think it's worth pointing that out because actually Dante was pointing us towards transformation, spiritual transformation. And it follows all this same pattern. So we know that the caterpillar munches the leaves and it keeps growing until it gets to a point that in its current form, it can't grow anymore. So it has to go to that pupating stage, go into the cocoon and literally dissolve and break down. At that point, you're in a sort of in-between stage. There's this soup of both caterpillar and both butterfly existing together. The constituent parts have been broken down and they're now slowly being reconstituted. And as they're reconstituted, the new form takes place, the butterfly, which eventually pushes its way out and comes into the world, makes a new life, so to speak. Psychologically, we seem to go through the same sort of pattern, that we get through stages of development, and then there comes a point when we need to transform from one stage of development to another. And this is what Dante was describing in his work, The Divine Comedy, or one of the things that he was describing, because it's one of these beautifully rich, symbolic and allegorical texts that you can read and see things on many levels. On one part of it is a political discourse about the time. Another part of it is a religious discourse, but another part of it is this sort of semi-autobiographical
and romantic
journey of his own transformation. So we see this pattern playing through it. In fact, Dante's Divine Comedy has the Inferno as the first book, Purgatorio as the second book, or Purgatory, and as the second book, and the third bit, Paradise or Paradiso, going up into heaven. So again, we've got this three-part pattern that runs through it. But my journey started with Joseph Campbell, the mythologist. If you haven't come across him, I totally recommend going and looking at his work and looking at his recordings. I think The Power of Myth is the famous video that he did back in the day in, I think, the early 80s. But he'd been looking at all these different wisdom traditions and mythologies, and he recognized that there seemed to be a pattern running through them. And again, it's a three-part pattern. He talks about a departure from a particular world. Once upon a time, everything in the kingdom was fine, and then something starts to happen and things aren't so good, where you're called to adventure, but often
the famous journey of the hero.
Exactly, the hero's journey. The hero refuses the call, gets some help, crosses a threshold into another world or another place in existence, goes on this road of trials and challenges and
priestess and whatnot.
Exactly. Now, I become somewhat slightly obsessed with Joseph Campbell's work.
Welcome to the club.
It's because it's beautiful, it's brilliant, and it's rich. But again, it was helping me navigate through these very serious and important changes in my life. And I was teaching undergraduates and I was being asked to teach the hero's journey, and a colleague of mine turned around and said, this is notoriously difficult to teach to undergraduate psychology students. I was making them into these good psychologists that are questioning everything, critical reflection the whole way through. And we don't want any of this sort of mythological, poetic sort of stuff coming in and clouding the waters, so to speak. So how on earth do you think you're going to do this with them? And instantly I turned around and said, I need to find an example. I need to find an example of someone going through the hero's journey. Because what Joseph Campbell did that was brilliant was find the pathway, the stages of this transformation. And he puts it out so beautifully in this monomyth, this story. So you can really place yourself in where you are in the journey. But what a psychology student would be really interested in is what is happening to the person, to the identity of this person that's undertaking that heroic journey. And when we're talking about heroic, please, I don't want to get this into, we're talking about people swashing around with swords and running into burning buildings. It could be that. But actually, the heroic part of this is what we would call the ego. This narrative identity, this story of who we are. And the interesting thing about that, why it's heroic, is because it's sacrificial. At some point, it has to give itself up to a greater force. And that greater force is what Jung would say is the unconscious part, the self. This part of us that has been nudging through life and trying to guide us on a journey of our own growth, realizes our own unique potentialities. And it has to go to Ian McGilchrist talking about the left and right hemispheres of the brain, the left being this very egoic, logical reason part, and the right being this associative, creative, artistic part. And he's making the argument we've got a society that's sick because it's leaning to this egoic side, this left-hand brain. But it's not the master, it's the emissary. That's the point he makes in the title of his book, The Master and the Emissary. We've got it the wrong way round. It's this other part of us, this quieter, unconscious part of us that's the real master. And that's what Joseph Campbell's describing in this heroic journey. Let me say it a different way. It's a journey of becoming who we truly are. And that takes a moral courage. And that's why it's heroic. And you turn straight away to the second love in your life, or the third love. I should throw my wife in there and get myself out of any trouble. But in terms of my work, the second love of my life would be Dante's Divine Comedy. And I realized that the comedy, this book, this wonderful text, is this heroic journey. It does align with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey sequences. So we get a chance to look inside the transformation of identity through those stages of the hero's journey by looking at Dante's Divine Comedy. And I think, put it simply, we can say, look, there is a part, the start of this journey is an awakening that we could describe as a breaking out. It is a breaking out of our old identity. It's the first signs that things might not be quite as we believe them to be. Often this can come through moments of challenge, through crisis or trauma, but also it can equally come through moments of realizing our calling or passion, or recognizing some previously unknown talent that changes our perspective on ourselves, our horizon. This stage of awakening, this of breaking out and breaking down, because it's got to shake the foundations, otherwise it's too easy to discount. So there's got to be something that really disturbs us, that we can feel disturbed within ourselves, that throws out these questions. And perhaps then this awakening is something that requires us to have the courage, not just to hear this, but to do something, to act, to make a choice. And that requires us to tap into those passions, those hope, and the will that we have within us, these resources that we have, if we can get down to those deeper layers of our being. And once we do that, once we make that choice, once we say, actually, I'm going to change something in my life, I'm going to listen to this body of mine that's giving me information, this spirit of mine that's telling me something. As we step forward, first of all, we've gained some self-authority just in making that choice. It's a choice that we can only do ourselves. As Jung said, if you're on the path and there's someone ahead of you, it's not your path. He's making the point that we have to choose to do this ourselves. So instantly we gain autonomy and authority. But as Dante starts to go down in his quest, as he starts to go through hell, what you're starting to see also is Dante changing his awareness about himself, because originally, as he starts this journey, all these people suffering, they deserve it. And I'm not like that. these are people who have done bad things, and I'm not bad, but they've done bad things, so they deserve it. But as he's going through this, he gets to the point where he starts recognizing people that he doesn't think should be there. And he's going,
His
hold
old
on.
teacher.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're there, whoa, doesn't that mean that I'm this whole dance between the world as a mirror of ourselves? We start to recognize and deepen our awareness of who we are. We're beginning to get that deepening of self-knowledge. We're actually recognizing that this journey through our shadow side, so to speak, all what we see in the world and that we can name somewhere exists within ourselves. And that means I'm going to say something perhaps controversial, perhaps not. Potency of that is that what drives people to do bad things, to kill, to cheat, to lie, to destroy the world and other people, those qualities exist with me, inside me. And if you don't think that they can exist within inside us, can you imagine a situation where you could, if the conditions are right, be forced into doing something you didn't want to or didn't like, or you think is morally opposed to who we are? And that's, I think, the important bit that started things there with Dante. He was starting to recognize this wasn't about other people. This was about potentially within him. And as Jung puts it, what is unconscious has the ability to own us. So it's about making the unconscious conscious. It's about recognizing these forces within us and recognizing that they're part of who we are. Because within that is also where Jung tells us we will find the gold. This is also the place where we will find our potentiality. That anger can be a force for, let's say, bad, but also anger can lead us into righteous action to make the world a better place, to do things that we didn't think were possible. But we have to have that conscious understanding of it for it to be able to manifest in a way that is going to have those sorts of outcomes. So
if I somehow follow you, then you could say that in the end of the Dark Ages, they misinterpreted his work, and I just didn't see the liberation and just looked at it too literal with the Inferno and then creating this concept of hell. So that's basically they didn't have Jung yet to interpret him in the fullest of his writing.
Absolutely. And I would love to say I'm the first person that comes to this. I'm absolutely not. There's a wonderful book by Helen Luke, Dark Wood to White Rose, who in the 1970s explored psychologically what Dante, the transformation that Dante was talking about and going through, and comes to similar conclusions. More recently, I think it was around about 2005, there's the book by Adriana Bella, Searching for Beatrice, that again looks at it through this perspective of different archetypes and different psychological.
You know that there are so many people saying that Dante started the whole hell purgatory obsession with the Catholic world, and it turned out to be a fantastic business model. By the way, Google would be jealous.
Yes.
It's the mother of all business.
Oh yeah. Ka-ching. Ka-ching.
Oh, brother.
Absolutely. But so many of these great works, Philip, that they speak to us on different levels. And yes, you can read things at that level. And yet what you can see is a very human journey. Here's a person that's going through his own challenge and transformation, and he's trying to describe it in a poetic way. He's using symbol and imagery. This is that right-hand side of the brain coming into play to speak to us on a very human level. And it's difficult to see that wasn't intentional. We know he was influenced by Aristotle, so that we know there's Aristotelian thinking in there. We know that there's so much how he's able to go into this, seeing things through his own eyes, that there's this autobiographical aspect to it. We're getting a very real journey of transformation. And I think the test is that it stood the test of 600 years and people are still coming to it and recognizing that this is a profoundly important piece of work. And I think it's because it's incredibly human. He's describing something we can all recognize in these wonderful metaphors, but ultimately it's human, it's psychological, it's spiritual.
That is for sure. And that is why the podcast exists, to talk about spirituality. And we're coming to the last bit of the podcast. So let's pause here for a moment. And because a lot of people that maybe are still hanging with us and trying to follow and try, and everyone is asking, who the hell is Beatrice? And is she blonde or not? And why are we here in this conversation? Why anything? Because in a world where people want instant enlightenment and instant this and instant that. And I had a wonderful conversation that actually got me a lot of thinking a couple of days ago with a very young woman. And me being 30 years plus in the spiritual world and so wise and podcasts and everything. And I you got years ahead of you and you're going to read and research a lot and going to be such a lovely, I'm like almost saying condescending things like, oh, I'm so jealous that all of this is in front of you, whatnot, how embarrassing old man got. And I'm just, I don't know, I've lived so many lives. I'm just going to reconnect with one of my previous lives and download all the information and start way ahead of you. Because I had so many lives, I can feel it, and my enlightenment will just go on from there. And so basically, while the 30 years sit on the floor like you and eat rice, I just download all the information. And you read Dante, and I don't know, people talk to horses, and it's all a big mess, right?
Certainly, that's my experience. It's all a bit messy. It's all a bit of a real. Couple of things that stand out for me there. I look back at life and I think, yeah, if only I knew some of this stuff earlier. If only I'd got a grasp of this earlier. How might life be so different? And yet there's a part of me that recognizes I had to ask the questions I did. I had to go on the journey that I did to get to this point. I don't see there's a way of taking that shortcut in one sense, other than how we leave, the footprints we leave in the world, other than the state in which we leave the world. And all of this comes to the point that we are always on the shoulder of giants. We are always held up by those that have gone before us. If it wasn't for Jung, if it wasn't for Dante, if it wasn't for those people beforehand that asked those questions and given their part of the answer, I wouldn't be able to make my part of the answer. What is the work that I've been doing around Dante? It's been trying to take this immense piece of work and bring it to a contemporary audience, to change the language into self-authority, self-awareness, to recognize that this is a journey of awakening, but also one of growing, where we have to have the courage to persevere, where we need to build up compassion, faith, and discernment. But the boon of that is that we can learn to accept ourselves more fully. And as Carl Rogers says, the great paradox is as we accept ourselves more fully, that's the time in which we change. There's something here about self-trust, learning to trust ourselves as a whole person. There's something here about realizing the deepest potentials of ourselves. And ultimately, as we, like that caterpillar that was all this caterpillar butterfly soup, there's something that reconstitutes. There is an integration where we might have or need the courage to actually be, i.e., to step forward and own who we are and to recognize that love, that power, that wisdom that we've got through the journey. In a sense, what I'm talking about is a state of self-expansion, of becoming more of who we are, not less, not something different, but more of who we are, of being true to that, a self-authenticity, of being able to stand up and recognize who we are, and in doing so, being in service to something bigger than us. All of those themes are littered through Dante's Divine Comedy in those 3 different books. And I think there's a language that we can put into the world in this day and age that can make sense to the time, So we don't all have to fall in love with Dante's Divine Comedy. We can recognize that there is a distilling of that, of the wisdom from that book that can be put into a language for the time of now. And I think that if I could do that, would be more than a life's work for me.
More than a life's work for anybody. And first of all, listening to your all those wonderful words and how you're putting them, I put it down to one word: courage. That's how it feels like. We seekers, we can only pray every morning and every evening just for courage to stay on the road and walk the road as honorable and honestly as we possibly can. So courage is one thing. And as a person who is angry every time he is going with some archaeologist through some Greek ruins, and then why the hell can't they not just next to it rebuild it in all its glory? And I don't care if it's for papier-mâché, but it's to show the beautiful colors and the scent and the perfumes on the statues and this unbelievable 3D experience. Why on earth do I stand here in this rubble and here was a temple and here was a bathhouse? I don't care. Just build it next to it so people understand this insane, magnificent human achievement in the time and with these tools. And so if you tell me that you will make me be able to read Dante so that I really can relate to it and understand and not just have this historic text and with the historic language, and I can force myself to see this and there, but overall, I'm not a scholar as you are. It would be a present and a gift to the world that the Greek touristic authority do not seem to understand.
That is the challenge. It's the passion that's grasped my soul, or my soul has been asking me to grasp. It's been a number of years. I'm looking at it from a particular perspective, and it doesn't take away from all those other scholars that are looking at it from their perspective, their different perspectives. But I think here we have a psycho-spiritual journey of transformation that really acts as a story, a myth for this modern day and age, to help us mature, to become the elders that we have that capacity to be. And if there's something that, whether the world was lovely, and let's imagine the world, as you said, was in its magnificent glory, all beautifully built, the challenge for me, the challenge for you would be still to go inwards, to find out at the deepest level who we are, and to express that through our being in service of something bigger than us. Whether the world is as it is today, which we might say is quite polluted, is dark, we've got these nefarious forces, politically, the world's in chaos, financially, the world's in chaos, we've got a crisis of meaning, we've got a crisis of mental health, we've got a crisis, you name it, we've got a crisis going on in it. You can wake up and you can be overwhelmed, as I am on many a day, and yet the challenge or the solution or the thing that we're offered, the invitation that life gives us, changes not a jot. It's still about going inwards. It's still about realizing who we truly are at that depth, without all detritus that life throws and puts on us and lets us believe that we're this, that, and the other. But it's taking off that concretion and getting to the truth of who we are, and to bring it out and to express it in our creativity, in what we do and how we live. And that, if all of us are doing that, if all of us make that step, then ultimately this world will change. And it will change, I believe, for the better.
Thank you so very much, Lee. When I saw you at the beginning of this podcast sitting beside that bright light all around you, I knew that we will come back out from hell and that you will. And I was also very much trusting your hand and guidance. So I was not afraid exploring for you the deepest of Dante, and you brought us back to life. And thank you so very much. I think we're all looking forward from whenever that work will be published. And I hope you'll back here to discuss a lot more many times. Thank you so very much, Lee. Thank you.
Philip, that would be my pleasure. And thank you for this opportunity.